idea behind this event is to kind of, first of all, to showcase the great work that's been going on across Fife with our plastic-free groups. And the second is to tie in with the work that we've been doing around climate change, and also the way that we tackle climate change at Kirkcaldy, which is looking for really practical activities that we can do to tackle climate change based in our community, choosing our own goals, being empowered. So the first part of tonight are presentations from plastic-free groups across the whole of Fife, and it's really about the story so far. And then the second part, we will go into breakout rooms, so you'll be assigned a group, and we'll work together to tackle a topic. So the first part will start now in a minute and finish at 7, and then from 7 till 8 we'll be in our workshops. So the first person to speak is Kim from Surfers Against Sewage, and he's going to give an introduction to plastic-free communities, how they came about in the first place, what their work is. And then we'll hear from Daphany, who's part of Plastic-Free St Andrews. She'll be talking about their work with businesses. We'll hear from Alice from Plastic-Free Anstruther, and she will be talking about their work with schools. And then finally, Kim will finish off with another presentation talking about how they've been working with communities. So hopefully everyone has a lovely presentation tonight. So hopefully we'll be able to screen share it in a moment, and I'll hand over now to Kim.
Thanks. I'll just try and share my screen. Hopefully it will work. Hang on a minute. How's that? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Just to clarify, I'm no more from Surfers Against Sewage than any of the other speakers tonight. We're all basically the community leads of plastic-free communities that have achieved accreditation through the Surfers Against Sewage scheme, but I'm not a member or a sort of officially part of the organisation. I just started the community here in Dalgety Bay. Just to sort of introduce what our network is about first before we drill down to the community level. So last year, I can't remember when it was, July or August, something like that, we decided that while there were sort of several plastic-free communities starting up or already quite active throughout Fife, there was a sort of a lack of them all sort of working together and generating synergies, and also particularly we were all focused on what we were doing locally and sort of missing the level of working with Fife Council, with the Scottish Government even, on sort of slightly bigger issues, if you like, on sort of policy type issues. So the existing plastic-free communities in Fife, which are let me think, there's Charleston, Limekilns and Pattysmuir is one, then Dunfermline, Dalgety Bay, Anstruther and St Andrews banded together. Kirkcaldy also joined in with us, even though they're not part of the Surfers Against Sewage scheme. And we had a couple of sort of people from outside, so North Queensferry and Falkirk are sort of a little bit involved as well. And we've been working on a number of sort of different issues since we started, mostly, as I say, at the level of sort of Fife Council and the Scottish Government. So just to give you sort of a flavour of the type of things that we've been doing in the network, rather than at plastic-free community level, you may or may not know that Fife Council created a register of single-use plastics maybe about 18 months ago, which basically was supposed to be a list of all the single-use plastics that the council uses and their plans to address these issues. And they made there was a lot of publicity when they got rid of the little plastic ties that they used to sort of stick things up to lampposts and stuff, and that was part of this register. But in its first incarnation, it was really pretty shoddy effort, to put it mildly. So Plastic-Free Fife kind of got hold of this, and all the sort of different members of the network kind of worked through it, and we made a sort of detailed list of suggestions to them about how they could improve it, how they needed to improve the deadlines, you know, for action, and so on. And we recently received information of the latest update of the register, which has incorporated pretty much everything that we suggested into it. I mean, whether that translates into effective action remains to be seen. So that's one thing. You might also have heard about the Scottish Government's consultation on its plans to ban certain single-use plastics in line with the European Union's Single-Use Plastics Directive. So that took place at the end of last year. And our network was very involved in trying to raise awareness of the fact that there was this consultation in the first place, because nobody knew about it, and to help people answer it, because it was quite technical in places. So we developed a sort of template response to the consultation, which, you know, like the things you get when you do a Friends of the Earth thing, that you could just sign off on it if you wanted to, or you could pick out the bits that you liked from it and send them in your own response. And we also had a webinar where we discussed the whole thing and kind of got ideas from people that we could also include in the template response. So that did translate as well into something, because when we saw the documents produced by the Scottish Government in relation to this consultation, some of the content of those documents clearly came from our input. You could like identify it. So we've been able to influence, to a limited extent, but policy at that level as well. Some of the more sort of tangible things, maybe. Again, I don't know whether you're all aware, but since the schools, since COVID, primary schools throughout Fife have started serving lunches in these polystyrene lunch boxes, and taking them into the classrooms rather than them all going into the canteen. And we got wind of this, and clearly, you know, a lot of schools are very unhappy about this, and some schools are trying to achieve plastic-free status, and yet they're having to serve their lunches to the kids in these boxes, which is ludicrous. So we've been kind of trying to put pressure on Fife Council to do something about this through various means. We've been in touch with them directly. We also got the school kids, as I'll show you here, to write letters into to the council and to their local MSP as well. These are children at Dalgety Bay Primary, and we kind of help them with writing the letters. At the moment, that seems to have had the effect of getting them to replace plastic cutlery with sort of wooden cutlery in Dalgety Bay, at least, which was a minor success. And they've kind of gone back to canteen service in about a third of schools, but they're playing quite sort of their cards close to their chest, if you like. They're not really kind of being very transparent about why the other schools haven't gone back. So it's an ongoing thing that we're working on. And the other big thing that we've been doing recently in the run up to Holyrood is that we've developed this election pledge that we've just sent out to all the candidates in Fife, and hopefully throughout Scotland. We've asked the party headquarters to send it to all the candidates throughout Scotland, which is basically asking all the candidates for the upcoming elections to commit to certain actions on, you know, lobbying to reduce single-use plastics in Scotland. I won't go through them all here. By its very nature, it has to be a very general sort of thing, this, but it's a sort of stepping stone for us to work more closely with our MSPs and hopefully hold them to account if they do sign it when in the new Parliament. So we've already had a couple return. We've only sort of launched that this week, and we've had a couple returns already. We're hoping we'll get a lot more. So that's pretty much just a sort of introduction to the network of Plastic-Free Fife that we've created, but sort of drilling down to the level of individual communities, because one of our big hopes, sort of goals, is to sort of get more plastic-free communities started in Fife, and hopefully maybe some of the people here will think about doing that after they've listened to what we have to say. so the communities that form the network were all part of this Surfers Against Sewage scheme, plastic-free community scheme. Now, Surfers Against Sewage is a organisation based in Cornwall that originally, as you could probably guess from the name, was sort of concerned with water quality, but it's sort of morphed into an organisation that does a lot of work on reducing plastic pollution. And I think we all found that when we had the idea that we wanted to do something about reducing plastic in our community, this sort of program gives you a very good framework for doing that. You know, when you start off, you haven't really got much of an idea where to go, and it's got a very structured approach. So they basically have 5 objectives that they ask you to meet in order to achieve plastic-free community status. And depending on the size of your town or village, you have to sort of do more or less of each one. So, you know, the smaller communities like Dalgety Bay, for example, you have to get a relatively small number of businesses on board. In a larger community like Dunfermline, you know, the number goes up in accordance with the size of the population. So the 5 objectives, we're going to talk about some of them in greater detail, but the first one is business champions, they call them. So basically what they ask you to do is to speak to small local businesses. They're not interested in sort of us addressing chains like supermarkets or national chains. They want us to talk to local businesses and try and get them to reduce at least, or to eliminate at least 3 single-use plastics from their activities, which really isn't that hard. And in fact, you know, well, Daphne will talk about this in more detail, so I won't say too much about it now. But it's a good way of kind of engaging with the business community, which is obviously very important in terms of sort of reducing quantities of plastic. So the second objective is what they call community allies, and that's all sorts of local organisations, groups. You know, again, we'll speak about this in more detail later on, but it includes schools, and Alice is going to talk specifically about schools in a minute. Then there's a community action and events thing, which again is pretty self-explanatory. So you have to try and sort of like raise the profile of what you're doing by organising events and getting the community involved. I'll be speaking to that. And then the last 2 are quite boring sort of objectives, if you like. So the local governance one, they basically ask you to get your local council to pass a resolution committing to reduce single-use plastics. It's relatively meaningless, and it was done in Fife very early on. James at Plastic-Free Dunfermline got Fife Council to do that. Well, it must be a couple of years ago now. So that's already done for us. And you have to form a steering group, and that has to have a local councillor on board, and it has to meet 4 times a year. So those are the sort of, that's the sort of structure that they give you, and then they give you all sorts of resources and things that you can use, and they monthly sort of activations and things that you can take part in. So that's a very brief introduction to the sort of overall sort of structure. I think, you know, all of the communities that are in Fife at least feel that this is a great way to start off, but it's not the be all and end all. And we kind of also like the freedom to sort of move beyond that and do lots of other things that may not get us credit for the plastic-free community scheme, but that are nonetheless important to do. So we're not sort of constrained by this in any way. So I think that's enough from me. So I'll hand over to Daphne now to say a bit about the business champions element of it.
Thanks very much.
I'll share my screen. There we go.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. That's really interesting. Just before, Daphne, just before you start, just want to let everybody know that we will hopefully we'll have a bit of time for some kind of questions as well, right at the end of the presentations before we go into our workshops. If you do have any comments or questions as we're going along, if you just add them into the chat as well. If people know how to use the chat box, please just stick them in the chat, and I'll have a look at them as we're going along, and we'll bring them up at the end. We just don't have questions for each presentation at a time. Sorry, questions for each presentation at the moment, I'm afraid. Yeah, so thank you, Daphne. If you're ready, I'll quieten myself down again.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And thanks for the opportunity to discuss a little bit more about Plastic-Free St. Andrews. And I just want to talk first of all about generally the issue of plastic pollution, and then what I've been doing over the past couple of years in the town. Plastic pollution, and let me share my screen. So plastic pollution, I think, is one of the most urgent environmental issues currently, and the main problem being, of course, single-use plastics, also known as disposable plastics. The definition that's commonly used is that it's the type of plastics that have a very short lifespan, usually ranging between few seconds to minutes. It's estimated that over about 8 billion tons of plastic is actually used globally, with over 200 million tons of plastic waste can be found in our oceans at this moment in time. On an annual basis, we are talking about 10 tons of plastic ending up in the oceans, and it's projected, it's going faster, sorry. And it's projected that it leads to about 34 billion tons by 2050 that we're going to have in our oceans. So obviously you can identify that's quite an unsustainable increase of plastic waste. So it's amazing to think of how long actually plastic waste as this kind of indication here we have of how long products exist for. With most of them having the ability to survive for hundreds of years, plastic waste is accumulating at a very rapid pace, both in land as well as in our oceans. So demand for plastic is expected to continue and rise over the next couple of years. So identifying an alternative is a priority. What is the answer? Often we talk about reduce, reuse, and refuse, and these are the three main areas. We need to reassess the negative impact of our throwaway culture and actually try to talk about what is necessary versus what is convenient. That's also led the discussion around single-use plastics, and that's one of the things I try to engage with when I talk to the businesses. Our priority has always been about reduction. It's more about engaging with the businesses and informing them that it's not only about identifying a different solution to single-use plastic, it's about generally trying to remove it from your business. One of the things I've taken as a priority in St. Andrews has been really to educate people. I've set up Plastic-Free St. Andrews 2 years ago, and I'm also, like Kim said, the community leader for St. Andrews on behalf of Surfers Against Sewage. And my priority was really attacking the business sector because St. Andrews generally is, a lot of people are aware of, is a tourist destination. So it has a very large number of cafes, restaurants, accommodation providers. So to that effect, I felt it was very important to engage with them and trying to get them to identify alternatives to single-use plastics. I did a survey at the beginning of it, I would say probably about February 2019. And it was a survey both with food and drink establishments. In St. Andrews, actually, there's 144, well, there were 144 at the time. And just to see how much single-use plastics they use and what items they're willing to remove from their operations. It was quite interesting to see that out of the 144, almost 70% were very keen to engage with me, and they were very keen to identify alternatives. Some of them already had removed single-use plastics from their operations, and those who haven't wanted to know more about what are the next steps and what they needed to understand in order to achieve plastic-free status with Surfers Against Sewage. One of the things I also identified with them is the idea that it was important to not necessarily replace the plastics with something else, but actually find alternative ways of operating. So one of the things we did when I started was engaging with the local environmental group, which is the St. Andrews Environmental Network. And we had a big launch event in June 2019, just to introduce the concept within the town. We always had a presence in the farmers market, and again, trying to identify items and start the conversation, start the discussion, both within the local business community, but also the residents of St. Andrews. The Plastic-Free St. Andrews initiative was really launched both to engage with the businesses, the university, and other main stakeholders. As you all know, it's also because of the golf industry has a very big presence in that sense. So talking to the RNA, talking to the Links Trust was part of my engagement with the business community. Obviously, since the pandemic, things have slowed down, but I still continue to have these conversations. And also what I've started doing is giving a lot of virtual talks with various groups within the business associations as well. When engaging with the businesses, I wanted to continuously highlight the need to change the consumption patterns. It's about changing the way of thinking, it's changing of how the way they operate. Zero waste shops are becoming a bit of a norm and is very much seen as an alternative way to shopping for a lot of the food and household essentials. So this option has been gradually being introduced within St. Andrews, and some of the shops are actually already trying to incorporate, if not as a whole, but elements of like you can see, reusable containers within their premises. The other option was also starting to look at other alternative products to plastics as a business. I've developed a really good relationship with a lot of suppliers of different products, like, as you can see here, plates or coffee cups made out of palm leaves, banana leaves, just to showcase that there are viable options that are not necessarily only single-use plastics. It was very much, and again, the big question always, I mean, the central question out of businesses was, is this a more expensive alternative? And I would have said maybe a year and a half ago, the options were less, there were less options out there, and a lot of these options were more expensive. But nowadays, I think there's so many companies that have developed alternative products to single-use plastics that the cost actually has not become an issue. And out of, I would say about 70% out of the businesses who've already shifted to these kind of products did mention that cost is no longer a problem for them. So they have managed to move into these alternative products without actually having to worry about what it entails. One thing I was discussing with a lot of the businesses is also being very much careful about what they look at, for example, vegware or compostable or other biodegradable products. That is not always the answer. And that's why I think suggestions like the ones presented here was very much a preferred choice for a lot of them. Also, when I was approaching food establishments like cafes and takeaways, there was a lot of discussion about minimizing the use of single-use plastics in terms of the coffee cups. So one easy change for a lot of the shop owners was actually supporting the swap of disposable coffee cups and promoting the use of reusable cups. And I think that was really useful. This specific slide was always the one that presented a good way to showcase the difference between the use of single-use coffee cups and a reusable one. They also saw that there was a lot of their own customers was beginning to demand for them to offer that. So we've noticed with a lot of the local coffee shops, they're offering a discount if you bring your own cup. So again, making it attractive. I know again, during the pandemic, there's been a lot of discussion about, due to health and safety, that people shouldn't bring their reusable cups. Some of the shops actually have accepted the fact that that is not the case, and actually going down the route of providing a contactless process where basically the server comes with a tray and you put your reusable cup, and so there's actually nobody touches it, and he just pours the coffee or tea, whatever it is, on the cup and then passes it on the tray. So it's actually much more hygienic than having a cup that he or she would have touched to fill in and then pass it on. It's also something that looking at the, I suppose, of the reusable cups, one of the things that was highlighted continuously is that right now in the UK, it's estimated that over 12 million cups are being used on an annual basis. And again, this is something that's really honed in within the mentality of a lot of the shop owners, and wanted to showcase that they are making a difference to that effect. I know Kim said that we're not supposed to engage with larger chains, the supermarkets, but I have I've established a really good relationship, a really good dialogue with a lot of the main supermarkets here in town. And one of the reasons is we're really pushing to remove plastic packaging from fruit and veg aisle, and also trying to identify ways to deal with the issue of plastic waste in other items, like the multi-pack tins and some of the other areas. Some of them, I'm not saying that all the supermarkets have been receptive to that, but there's definitely been a couple of the supermarkets which have already taken the lead, and they've already making that kind of effort. It's very important. And again, when I'm talking to residents, because a lot of people are always complaining about, oh, why do we still have plastic packaging for the fruit and vegetables, is I'm always trying to highlight to them that in order for a supermarket to change the supply chain, it's quite a lengthy and complicated process. And on average, it takes between 12 and 18 months before we actually see those positive changes on our local supermarkets. So I continuously highlight to the residents that yes, this supermarket has already started the process, or there is already movement in certain areas with others. On the consumer good markets generally, there's right now several alternatives that are promoting plastic-free packaging. One of them is actually Loop. Loop, as an initiative, has brought over 300 brands together to provide reusable containers that can be refilled with a branded product and then sold through the supermarkets. This scheme has been trialing both in the US and France very successfully, and it finally got introduced in the UK in September 2020. So since then, there's been actually a lot of interest in engaging with Loop. Tesco, as far as I know, in Scotland has taken the lead. So you can use the Loop scheme through Tesco. I know other supermarkets are also planning to incorporate it within their own businesses. So it's evident that several businesses are revisiting their production and packaging strategy, and they really are trying to implement sustainable solutions. The urgency of trying to control and decrease the use of single-use plastics obviously is undeniable. Therefore, I think it is important that actions need to be taken at all levels and by all stakeholders globally if we want to control the amount of plastics that currently exist. So I just wanted to end with this one to highlight exactly where we could be by 2050 if we don't make any action in relation to plastic. And yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them.
Thank you very much, Daphne. Yeah, so I think some people have, and actually Katie asked something and Miriam answered it. I think we'll take them all at the end and have a little bit of discussion around some of the questions that are coming up. But that was really interesting. It's very exciting to see what's happening in St Andrews. That was my hometown for over a decade, so it's great to see those changes. Thank you. And next up is Alice, who's going to talk about Plastic-Free Anstruther's work.
Hello, I'll share my screen as well. I am the community lead on Plastic-Free in Anstruther on the east coast of Fife. But I'm also a teacher at Wade Academy. I'm a biology and science teacher at Wade Academy. So we've gained our plastic-free status from Surfers Against Sewage. But I feel that what I'm going to talk about today is the work I've done in my role as a teacher and eco-schools coordinator at the school. So if you're not a teacher, then obviously these things are quite difficult to translate into if you're not on the inside. However, a lot of these things can be done, or if you're a part of a parent council, or they can be done very easily in primary schools. This is a secondary school I'm talking about. So I feel the most powerful way to change attitudes and change behavior is through children. Obviously, the pester power that children have to their parents and with each other is much more powerful than any kind of advertising that you can see on television, I feel. And I've seen that over the years. We've been, we've got our 8th green flag. Well, we're going for our 8th green flag at Wade Academy. That's the furthest ahead that any school in Fife has got to in secondary. So it's a long and very healthy, sustained program that we have. So way before I'd even heard of Surfers Against Sewage, the eco-school team that I run was always concerned about plastics as part of our general sort of ethics. And so we've been running lots of successful projects for a few years now. So I'll tell you about a few of them. So we have a new school. And what I do every year is I encourage, or the pupils are encouraged to carry out litter picks. And that's a really powerful way for pupils to see the impact of their thoughtless discard of waste in their immediate environment. And we do it, so we separate the school area into 4 different areas. We have a new school and the grounds are quite easily covered within one period of the school for school day. And so it's the PSE teachers that take that on in their class time, because obviously we have curriculum to develop, so they do that. And they're really happy to do it. And the kids are really, they enjoy it. They're given litter pickers, they're given bags, and they're given time outside of class, and they enjoy that. But what has enhanced it massively is, so that's them doing their litter pick there. So what's enhanced it is by asking the pupils to do a survey. And so if you do this in a community group, it's quite interesting to see what you get. So we tally up every item that we collect, and that, it's quite evident that a lot of it has come from the pupils themselves, and they're often quite overwhelmed at how much stuff is collected, and especially the number of fag butts that they find around the back of the sports hall. It's quite shocking. So once we've done that, then we pass that data on to the maths department and they analyze it. So S1 pupils can do graphs, they can do pie charts, they can do percentages, and it can go further up. They can do all sorts of clever things, and they can use Excel. So that's real data that they can use, and they use that to display, to use as real data, which is always brilliant. But we use that in assemblies, and we share those ideas, and we learn from the data that we're collecting, and it's just hard evidence of what is being thrown away. Interestingly, we have, as a community lead, I'm working with the communities as well, the businesses, and trying to encourage them to take away fast food containers, the polystyrene containers, and encouraging them to use cardboard alternatives. And there's one hardcore little cafe that is very, very popular with the kids, selling chips, but they stockpiled their straws, their plastic straws, because they were worried that they were going to run out with the new regulations that were coming in. So they're quite hardcore, and the amount of polystyrene boxes that we found, and the kids were really, quite shocked to see them all piling up there. So hopefully, there'll be pressure from the pupils on the community as well. We've done beach cleans for years, and they love it. I don't know any pupil that's not loved that. Again, they're out of school, they get to wear their own clothes, but they don't just pick up plastic bottles and everything else. They pick up tires. We've had car batteries, we've had buckets of diesel oil. But they end up getting really, really stuck in, and a very, very positive outcome. Very great to see the kids out in the community doing something that's really positive, and the local people love seeing that, and it's a very good accolade for the school. So that's done every year, and we have up to about 100, 120 kids out in the school, out in the local community at different times in large groups, doing a lot of really good work. We have had our local MPs and MSPs into school. We had Stephen Gethens and we've had Willie Rennie, and these are the questions that we put to them. This was 3 years ago. And we've always been concerned about the packaging in our local supermarkets, and this has come from the pupils themselves, and we wanted to know why logos are so bafflingly confusing, and why people don't take any notice of them because nobody understands them, why there's so much 4-line packaging, and why black packaging is used, and what happens to our waste. It says it's recycled, but I think I read somewhere that only 9% of our plastic is actually recycled. So we put it to them. They were both they gave us a lot of time. They really listened well to our questions, and they tried to answer them where they could. And it's Willie Rennie was very considered in his approach, and Stephen Gethens even went back to Westminster. And there he is with our star eco team. He went back to Westminster and he put forward a motion about our concerns, and he didn't really pick up. It was more of what we're doing, which wasn't really our point, but I wanted him to put forward to the Scottish Parliament about these things that we're concerned about, and hopefully they could start to bring it up as a discussion in the Parliament. But anyway, we got a mention, and that was lovely. So it's nice for the kids to feel that they have an ear with the people that can really make a difference in theory. So we've also done things like, these are very simple things to do, that we've made these for Christmas sales, and we've had the pupils making them and selling them for charity, or bringing in their own bottles and using pencils from the school. This is a bottle that we designed, and we asked the pupils to design their own logo, and the message on the bottle was water for the world and think before you drink. So this has been going a long time, and we're selling these regularly, and it's basically to raise money for the charity, but also getting them to think about what they're taking and what they're drinking, whether they need to buy a bottle of Iron Brew at lunch, whether they need to buy a bottle at all. So these are very good quality. Actually, I've been using mine for years now, and it's one of the best ones that I've bought. So we had these posters around the school, encouraging pupils just to think about what they spend their money on, and if they don't buy bottles every day, they can buy these cool football boots and iTunes. That's dated it, because iTunes is it's all Spotify and stuff now, isn't it? But so yeah, so these have been very successful, and again, it's just getting awareness and getting pupils thinking and proactive, and then hopefully pressurizing their parents and their families as well. We've bought a whole load of cups to avoid the use of disposable cups in our discos and dances and things. That was money raised by the rag bag scheme. Please take your waste clothes to your local school for the rag bag. That raises significant amounts of money, and schools really need that money. So if you're doing a clear out, then that's where it should go. So that's been really successful. Trying to encourage teachers not to expect their coffee and tea to be brought to them in polystyrene cups. This came from the pupils and from the prefects. So we set up these posters and we asked the teachers to bring their own mugs. Such a simple thing to do, but it's something that had never really been pushed. And it was really powerful coming from the kids. And then suddenly we had a 90% drop in the use of polystyrene cups due to that pressure that was put on them. We had an exhibition. This was done with our community. One of our Plastic-Free Anstruther community members was collected rubbish off the beach, and they actually turned it into an exhibition. Quite sort of striking photos of all the plastic that she collected just from one small beach. It's the beach in the middle of Anstruther at the bottom of the hill. And she collected them and she put it all into a garage. And then her husband is a photographer and he turned it into an exhibition. And we showed this in the school. And it was quite powerful way to show how all of this is just floating around and staying there forever until someone picks it up. This is an event that we do every year. We've been working on this climate challenge for many years before this was even mentioned in any other in the educational context at all. So these are two pupils, and they are talking about climate change. This is a cross-curricular project that we do. Again, it's just trying to get pupils passionate, thinking about beyond their immediate needs, and thinking about their decisions they're going to make in the future. They're the politicians of the future. They're the scientists. They're the consumers and business leaders. And it's a very powerful way to get them to think. And I'm always suggesting that they think about, renewables and the greener economy and sustainability in their future education, in their future jobs as well. So that's just a very quick tour of how schools can have an impact, and hopefully, working through them, we can get to the wider community. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Alice. Thanks. I think it's great hearing about children being empowered as well, and being involved and being given options as well, which they don't always have, which I think is great. And I love the idea of having to collect and analyze your own waste. I think that's a really great idea. We don't normally do that. Seeing it in situ is so important. I think there's also going to be a question for you in the chat too, so we'll come to that in a bit. But if you want to have a look at that, and then Kim's going to just finish off the presentation section by talking about the wider work with communities.
Yeah. Yes, I should mention actually while I think of it as well, that the Surfers Against Sewage scheme has a specific sort of package for schools. So a school can apply to be a plastic-free school, and they get sort of, again, a similar set of objectives to the ones for the plastic-free communities, which are things like doing litter picks and writing to their MPs and stuff. And that's, all these things are very good for sort of like raising awareness generally in the public. If you can say our schools have become plastic-free schools, it kind of raises general consciousness within your community about it. So I'm going to speak very briefly, because I know we've not got a lot of time, about the sort of community allies and events side of things, again within the framework of the Surfers Against Sewage programme. The community allies, as they describe them, is basically asking, what Surfers Against Sewage ask us to do is to get as many local community groups as we can to sign their Plastic-Free Communities pledge, which I'll show you in a minute. Well, I can show you it now actually. So it's this piece of paper which basically says that they'll try and remove 3 single-use plastic items, and they'll put it on their communications and things. This is something that they brought in after we got our accreditation, fortunately, and it's not something that our group particularly supports, because it's a bit of a box ticking exercise as far as we're concerned. They say you've got to get 20 or 25 of these things, and you run around chasing every local group you can find, asking them to sign it, but does it translate into effective action? We found that we prefer to sort of engage a bit more sort of like less formally with community groups, and just do things like, as Daphne was saying, at the moment in lockdown, really the only thing you can do is give Zoom talks to community groups, but that can actually be extremely effective, and of course you're not limited to your own community anymore. So I'm from a wildlife background, and I've done talks for groups like wildlife groups in Fife, like the Fife Bird Club, for example, and that sort of can be quite an effective way of engaging with community groups, you know, without having to sort of go, please sign this for us, which we found a little bit counterproductive, to be honest. And the other thing is also like writing your own articles for groups, or encouraging people you know in these groups to write articles in. And one of the things we did was with the local church here, for example, we had a big sort of every month in the parish magazine, they have a sort of theme. So we had a month where the theme was going plastic free, and we were talking about how they could, like in the events they have at the church, for example, encourage people to bring their bakes and stuff in plastic free sort of formats, rather than, you know, wrapped in cellophane or whatever, that type of thing. So, you know, working with community groups at the moment is nigh on impossible, if I'm honest, apart from the two things that I've mentioned. It's something that, you know, we'll be sort of looking to do more of once the restrictions are eased. So I sort of would rather talk a little bit more about the events that we've done in Dalgety Bay, because that's possibly something we've been able to keep going a little bit better, or did more of even before COVID as well. Beach cleans, I mean, Alice has touched on this, but I can't emphasize it enough. If you're looking to start a plastic-free group anywhere, especially in a coastal county, or if you're in a coastal community, it's by far the best way to start. Now, there's quite, I think, amongst sort of people who are heavily involved in plastic or anti-plastic campaigning, there's a tendency amongst some people to be a little bit dismissive of beach cleans, because clearly they're not the solution to the problem of plastic. I mean, you can do a beach clean and have a pristine beach, and the next day it will be just as bad as it was the day before. And because plastic lasts forever, it will keep washing up for decades to come. We know that. So doing a beach clean isn't really solving the problem particularly. It's always good because every piece you pick up doesn't end up in a guillemot's stomach or something, but it's nevertheless, you know, however, it's a fantastic means of engaging with the public. People love doing beach cleans because it's a sort of community spirit thing that it allows you to speak to groups or to individuals who would never be interested. If you started banging on about the environment to them, they would switch off. But if you say we're doing a beach clean, they'll want to come along and help, because it's like making the community tidy, if that's what floats their boat, or whatever. But it's this sort of banding together thing. So it's fantastic in that sense. It's also really good for sort of publicity, because you can get, as you can see here, you know, great photo opportunities, which you can then stick in the press or on Facebook or whatever. And you know, it's something that, again, the media want to hear about. So, you know, there are maybe far more important issues, like what's going on at Grangemouth, for example, that the media aren't that massively keen to hear about. But when it's a sort of good sort of vibe success story, like doing a beach clean, they'll always publish an article on that. And it's fantastic for educating not just kids. I mean, kids isn't the half of it, you know. It's fantastic for educating everybody. In Dalgety Bay, you know, we live on a part of the Forth which is absolutely infested with nurdles, the little plastic pellets that they use to make plastic out of, because they're carelessly loaded onto ships at Grangemouth, and they basically, half of them end up in the sea, and they wash up. Some of them wash up in our beaches. 450,000 were counted at North Queensferry a couple of years ago, for example. And most people who live in Dalgety Bay have never seen a nurdle. They don't know what they are because they're tiny. And we've got, as you can see here, a very rocky sort of coastline full of seaweed and little bits of stuff. You just don't see them until you do a beach clean and you start getting down to that level, and suddenly people become aware of what these things are. And that gives you a huge opportunity then to tell them the whole story about nurdles, and how, you know, their manufacture involves the use of gas that has been fracked in America and transported from America over here in massive tankers before it's converted into nurdles, which they then carelessly drop into the sea. So, you know, you would never be able to sort of get this message out to people if they hadn't seen it with their own eyes on a beach clean. So, and it's all sorts of things like that. I mean, the same goes for all the things that get flushed down the loo, which wash up on our beaches, you know, wet wipes and all sorts of toilet plastic. I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the things that we find here. But again, that sort of makes the message of don't flush these things down the loo much more tangible to people when they see where they end up. You know, they're not just in some sort of vague place in the ocean, they're actually on your own beach, but you don't notice them until you're sort of doing a beach clean. So we've done loads of these things in Dalgety Bay. We do them regularly. And we also started an Adopt a Beach scheme where we divided up the coastline as best we could from pretty much Aberdour up to sort of the west end of Dalgety Bay into different sections, and got either individuals or families to adopt a section, or also one of the primary schools and the nursery also adopted small sections of the beach, although that's since COVID, unfortunately, obviously died off a little bit as well. But this is a great way, again, of getting people to take ownership of their local community. So basically, we just ask people, whenever you can, go down there and pick some plastic up off the beach and let us know about it when you've done it. So that was sort of one of the things we started off with, and has been quite successful. I would say Alice is absolutely right that doing surveys is superb for school children when you're doing the beach clean. I would say our experience of doing surveys with adults was being less positive. Basically, we found that adults don't really want to stand there and fill in forms when they're doing a beach clean. They just want to pick up some plastic, basically. But you can still educate them in a more general way without needing to, to sort of. And part of the problem for this is that some of the forms for like organisations like the Marine Conservation Society are fiendishly complex, and you can spend like an hour and a half just trying to find the right thing to fill in. But beach cleans are definitely like the #1 community activity. Another thing we again, it's been completely sort of ruined by COVID, but another thing that we did for the first year that we were around was work with our Gala Day committee to try and minimize the amount of plastic used in the Gala Day, and this is really quite effective in terms of the fact that the people involved with the Gala Day are the real sort of like movers and shakers, certainly in Dalgety Bay. They know everybody. So they were a great way for us to develop contacts with various groups and organizations in Dalgety Bay. And I mean, one of the things that we managed to do for that first year was to get these reusable cups, which we sold to people at a cheap price, and then they could have like as much free water as they wanted during the gala. We were also working on all sorts of projects, like to eliminate sort of all types of plastic, like balloons and things from the gala. And we were going to have a massive shark with teeth made out of plastic bottles that we were going to have like people throwing things into as a game and things. But unfortunately, as you know, last year's gala was cancelled, and this year's has already been cancelled as well. But it's certainly a good way of speaking to the whole town, because everyone turns out for these events. And also they hold fundraisers throughout the year. So for example, at their Christmas light fundraiser, we've sort of switched on the Christmas lights. That was organised by the Gala Committee, and they were giving out free food. So we did some plastic-free cakes, which we made entirely using sort of like ingredients that hadn't come packaged in plastic, and we listed all the ingredients so that they could see, like next to the plate of cakes, what they were and where they'd been bought from, to sort of promote, the opportunities for plastic-free shopping. So that was the gala. Very quickly, also, like fundraisers are another really good way of getting the whole community involved. And I mention this mostly because, again, we're speaking to a slightly different audience. So we had a quiz night, fortunately, just before COVID, which allowed us to basically, a lot of the people who went there were more interested in quizzing than they were in the environment. But we really, the quiz was completely plastic themed. It was fun. It wasn't all like doom and gloom figures, because I mean that would have just been depressing and not a fun evening. So we tried to make it, you know, as unpo-faced as possible, if you like, but still educational. And you know, we actually, speaking to people afterwards, really opened the eyes of people who would probably never have got involved in the type of work that we're doing if we hadn't sort of used this format. And it was also a good opportunity to work with our local businesses, because all the plastic-free prizes that we got from our plastic-free champion businesses. So it was an opportunity to promote them and work with them and you know, get people in the town knowing what sort of stuff they were doing. And as you can see, you might recognise Louise from Grain and Sustain there. She came along and gave a little talk at the beginning as well. So it was a chance for us, because at that stage, Grain and Sustain had only been open a few weeks. So it was a good opportunity to promote that, you know, with people in Dalgety Bay. The last one I included as well, very briefly, was Mass Unwraps, which has got a big sad face next to it. It's just because Surfers Against Sewage are very keen on these things for some reason. Now, Mass Unwraps, if you don't know, are these things where you sort of go out into a supermarket and like take all the packaging off the products and then pile it all up and give it back to them and say, here, what are you going to do with this, more or less. And they really encouraged us to do this type of thing. But our group, and speaking to other groups in Fife, we all feel the same, that they're really not the way we prefer to do things. We'd rather work with businesses than be confrontational. And you know, also one of our groups did organise one, and they said never again. I mean, so I just sort of felt I should mention that there's a lot of work goes into these things. There's a hell of a lot of organisation for you to even be allowed to do them. And if you're going to sort of have a negative impact rather than a positive one, it's probably not the way to go. And it's also, to be honest, it's a bit of sort of last year as well. I think it's a bit outdated now anyway. So I thought I'd wrap up with Mass Unwraps. And we can probably move on to the workshop stage now.
Thank you very much, Kim. Thanks. I think you highlighted a couple of things that kind of we feel the same as well, that your talks and your gala days is that you can talk to any organisation or community group or business, but you need to have somebody there on your side, and you need to be talking about the things that they care about and connecting it to what they're trying to do and highlighting activities they can do, just not telling them what not to do. And I just want to highlight as well, you're talking about beach cleans, which are just, people just seem to, they are lovely. And Yvonne put in a comment in the chat, which I think, sorry, I've got a dog whining in the background, I just think summarised exactly what they do, which is highlighting needs and consequences. So that's one of the things that they really bring home, like Alice was saying, kind of what our activities are generating, and you get to tell stories about the invisible processes that we don't always see, that get lost when we engage with items as well, which I think is really, really important. So I'm just going to go through the chat and see what other questions are there. I think actually some of them have been answered. So Katie asked about vegware and why people weren't so keen on vegware, and Miriam answered that really well, and Daphne added to that as well, that it is a problem with how you get rid of vegware. I know actually some cafes, as one I used to go to in Edinburgh, would take back vegware as well. So they had a system for kind of rewarding people who brought back their vegware so they could dispose of it in the right way. So I think that's why Daphne was saying if there's an alternative to it, reusable rather than vegware. And then a bit of chat about Luke as well. And Yvonne's asked a question about, I'll just read it out because it was answered as well. For most organisations, what are the items which make the most difference in swapping for plastic-free replacements or new practices? To have some sort of tier system to start the process of becoming plastic-free. And that was answered by Daphne again. So Daphne said, for food and drink establishment, it's mainly containers, both in terms of coffee cups and food containers and carrier bags. And for accommodation providers, it's shampoo and shower, small containers in the rooms, and single sachets for tea, coffee, and milk. And I think this really ties into the second part of the event, when we're going to look at all the different areas where you might get plastic, which you can make the switch. I think it is, again, it's quite dependent on who you're talking to and their ability to make those changes too, and the appetite to make those changes. And I think that was it. So if there's any other questions as well, Kim.
Yeah, just to come in on that, I think that's quite an important point when you are sort of like looking at what organisations can reduce. It's quite good to sort of, before you go in and with a list of things that they have to get rid of, to actually kind of go about it the other way and just talk to them about what plastics, identify what plastics they're actually using, and go for the low-hanging fruits first before you scare them off. So, you know, otherwise, a lot of organisations are just going to switch off because you're saying we can't get rid of that. Now, they probably can, but, you know, if you do the easy stuff, if you start with something like, what tea bags do you use? You know, I've found at least that makes them feel they've achieved something quite easily before they have to tackle, you know, like for example, for a beautician, getting rid of all their little plastic bottles isn't easy. Finding alternatives, it's quite a major undertaking. So if you can say, well, we can eliminate some plastics before you get onto that, you know, some easy stuff first, then you're more likely to sort of get positive engagement from them, I think.
Good point. Daphne, do you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's what Kim said, it's about not scaring them off, whether you're talking to a business or a group or an organization. It's about identifying what's feasible, understanding what their needs are, but also understand their limitations. So it's very helpful. I found out when talking to businesses is whether it's a really one-man job, you know, obviously the cost is always the biggest issue. So I go there with an option. I will suggest some ideas, but on the basis that it's not going to cost them any additional money to incorporate something new. And, you know, with B&Bs or hotels, it's always the easy wins is, you know, just getting rid of the single sachets or replacing the shampoo or the shower containers, which, you know, really single use, just by putting in the rooms just the refillable containers. And they actually find out that it's financially beneficial because in the long term, it costs them less money to refill bottles than having to continuously buy the small single size ones. So.